Hello, everybody. Welcome to Fiveable's AP Gov and Politics CRAM. Tonight, we're talking about Unit 4, American Political Ideologies and Beliefs. My name is Katie Soon, and I'm coming to you from Covington, Louisiana, where I'm an AP US Government and Politics teacher at Northlake Christian. So, let's get started. Just a heads up, this stream is being recorded, so it might appear on our website, YouTube, and other public channels, as I'm sure you're watching on the replay. We are also available on all the social media accounts, so make sure you check us out at Think Fiveable. We would love to connect with you. All right. Also, we've got a couple trivia nights coming up. Make sure you join us on the 11th and the 15th for trivia night and get some practice with the multiple choice. Here is what we're covering tonight. First, we're starting with our introduction right now. Then we're going to jump into American attitudes about government and politics, political socialization, changes in ideology, influence of political events on ideology, measuring public opinion, evaluating public opinion data, ideologies of political parties, ideology of policymaking, ideology in economic policy, and ideology in social policy. So, how many times can you say ideology? It's a lot of ideology tonight. So now is usually where I check in and see where you're from, but we do not have a live audience tonight because this is the re-record. And we had some sound issues when we recorded live, so we are just doing a little redo. I also like to check in and see how you're feeling about the AP Gov test. I know it's big, I know it feels huge, but you're going to do fine, I promise. Just the fact that you're watching this and you're trying and you're practicing and you want to learn, you're better than like 80% of the kids taking the test because you're trying, you're putting it all out there, and I'm proud of you. Also, another quick check-in question I like to ask is, did you take the AP Gov as a semester course or a year-long course? I teach it as a year-long course, but I know a lot of you take it just as a semester. Let's go over some testing administration dates. So, Administration 1, this is the first time the test is offered. It's going to be May 3rd at 8 a.m. This is a paper test and it is only given at school. Next, for Administration Date 2 is May 20th at 11 a.m. And this is going to be digital, so on the computer, and this is going to be offered both at school and at home. And then Administration Date 3, June 3rd, 11 a.m., also digital, so on your computer, available at school and at home. And so what's the big difference between a paper exam and a digital exam? Well, one is how fast you type versus how fast you write for those essays. But the biggest actual difference is that on the digital exam, you cannot move backwards on your multiple choice questions. You can only move forwards. And this can be hard for a lot of people because their strategy is to, skip one that you don't know, skip one you don't understand, and then come back to it at the end. That's not an option this time with the digital exam. The College Board is locking it down, and so you're only allowed to move forward on these questions. So make sure you answer them as you go. You don't skip any. But also, if you get stuck on one, don't let it eat all your time either. You only have you have to answer 55 questions, and you only have an hour and 20 minutes to do that. And so this is section 1 of multiple choice, and it's worth 50% of your score, this 55 questions in an hour and 20 minutes. And then section 2 is all about the free response questions. And so you have 4 questions, or 4 sets of questions, I should say, and you have an hour and 40 minutes to do it. This is going to be 50% of your score. And the breakdown of the essays are, the first one is the concept application. The second one is the quantitative analysis. Your third is your SCOTUS comparison, and this is where all those required SCOTUS cases come in. So the ones that you're working on memorizing, you're going to use it here. And then the argumentative essay. This is the long one. This is the hefty, long, traditional type essay. And so if you are not sure about essay writing, make sure you join me for tips and tricks, both part 1 and part 2. In part 1, we're covering the first 3 shorter answer essays, and on part 2, we'll be covering just the argumentative essay. Also, make sure you talk to your teacher and figure out which administration date you are participating in. It's important to know when your test date is so you can prepare. All right, so context. What the public thinks and how that thinking is conveyed to government officials are factors in shaping public policy. So it's all about what the public thinks tonight. Oops, sorry, I'm all trouble. There we go. All right, so American attitudes about government and politics. Citizen beliefs include a range of opinions that help guide political actions and shape public policy. Some views amount to a clear consensus. A consensual political culture demonstrates that some values are shared among most of the population and those beliefs overlap. So I'm sure if I told you that most Americans had the same political beliefs, you would be like, whoa, 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 definitely not. But it's true. Most Americans share a lot of political beliefs. We just differ on how to meet the goals, how to get there. For example, nearly everybody agrees that children should be educated. However, people might disagree on aspects related to those issues. For example, what topics should children learn? So, political culture can also be conflictual when groups with opposing beliefs clash over key issues. So, people that have similar beliefs but don't agree on how to get there when they clash and crash um, over political issues, we have differing political opinions and differing political culture. All right, so when we talk about American attitudes about government and politics, this is kind of our main chart. This is a very simplified chart, but everybody can kind of fall somewhere on this line of political ideology. In the middle, we have our moderates. And then to the right, we have the conservatives, and to the left, we have liberals. So you'll hear people say, oh, they're on the left, or oh, they're on the right. And that has to do with whether they're conservative or liberal. And traditionally, liberal has to do with more democratic type people, and conservative has to do with more Republican type people. So let's talk about political socialization. So, what factors caused you or anyone to think about politics and policy in particular ways? Attending college, getting married, purchasing a home, and having children can all have an enormous impact on one's thinking. Even career politicians whose political positions are well known can switch views in response to an evolving world, changing life experience and competing for voter support in an election. So, what factors really affect our politics? And so, big ones are going to be our family, our school and college, our peers, the media, social environments, and geography. So, your political culture is very much influenced by the media system, the political system, and citizenry. So, political beliefs can be shared by major national political events, can be shaped by major national political events such as war, a charismatic president completing his agendas, or a landmark Supreme Court ruling that alters society. Each generation has its own political and economic events that bring about dynamic social change, and living through these events has an influence on political attitudes and socialization. For example, the older generation, those who endured the economic hardships of the Great Depression from 1929 to 1933, lived in an era in which people had a favorable attitude towards government involvement in the social life because of President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal policies. And so, because these New Deal policies were so successful, and because it helped get our country out of extreme, it's called the Great Depression. It was bad economically. So just extreme poverty. Because it worked, people tend to be mostly democratic during this time period. They tended to be more open to social policies that allowed for the government to give people more money, so more social programs. People were in support of this when they lived through the Great Depression. Then we have the baby boomers. And in 1964, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy left a lasting impact on a person's absorption of political culture. Kennedy's assassination was just one in the 1960s, a time of extreme social change and a call for social justice. And so, this kind of moment of where were you when you saw JFK was shot? Like everybody could kind of say exactly where they were and what was happening. And it was such a major defining moment that it really changed people's political ideals. And so there were several assassinations during this time period, during the 60s, and all of them really affected the baby boomers. And then we have our millennials, and during their very formative years, they're marked by September 11th. With the attacks on the country by Al Qaeda, this pushed millennials into one of two directions. Either it has called them to patriotism and nationalism, or it has pushed them against wanting to be involved in the Middle East. Oops. So measuring public opinion. The types of polls to measure public opinion are public opinion polls, benchmark polls, tracking polls, entrance polls, and exit polls. And so public opinion polls, which are used to gauge attitudes on issues or support for candidates in an election in a cross-section of the population. So public opinion polls is really just trying to figure out where public opinion is. Who do people support? Who do they not support? Then we've got our benchmark polls, which are often used to measure support for a candidate and to gather information about the issues that people care about. They often are the first type of poll used by a political candidate, often before a political candidate has declared his or her intentions. So usually before we even have whether or not a candidate's going to run, we know kind of how the public feels about them through benchmark polls. Then we have tracking polls, and it asks people questions to measure how prospective voters feel about an issue and how they may vote on election day. Tracking polls used during the course of an election allow a campaign to track issues and how a candidate is faring with voters. And then finally, we have entrance polls and exit polls, and these are conducted outside of polling places on election day to publicly predict the outcome of the election after the polls close. All right, so evaluating public opinion data. What the public thinks and how that thinking is conveyed to government officials are factors in shaping public policies. Professionals try to measure public opinion for a variety of reasons, using methods that make the results as accurate as possible. Analysts and citizens alike should consider the legitimacy of a poll as much as its general finding, because if its method is faulty, its finding will be as well. Reputable pollsters seek ways to avoid bias in sampling techniques and the wording of their questions. However, many polls are funded by political parties and special interest groups who want the poll results to tip in a certain way. All right, so also in measuring public opinion is the presidential approval. And approval ratings are gauged by pollsters asking whether the respondent approves, yes or no, of the president's job performance. Presidents usually begin their term with a fairly high approval rating as the people, Congress, and the news media get to know them during their so-called honeymoon period. These presidential honeymoons generally last a few months, and approval ratings usually reflect this time of good feeling, and predictably, these ratings will begin to decline as a president begins taking positions on issues. Because as they take positions, people are going to agree and disagree. And so as people disagree, their approval ratings goes down. All right, so evaluating public opinion data. The effects of polling. So first effect is the bandwagon effect. And national polling exerts influence on elections through the bandwagon effect. So you know the whole idea of jumping on the bandwagon? A shift of support to a candidate of position holding the lead in public opinion polls and therefore believed to be endorsed by many people. So when everybody feels like, oh, well, everybody supports them, well, then maybe I should too. This is the bandwagon effect. Then also social desirability bias, the tendency for respondents and declared voters to tell pollsters what they think pollsters want to hear. And so people want to be socially desirable. People don't want people to not like them. So if they think they're going to vote one way, or they think that they want them to be voted in one way, they might lie about how they're going to vote, just so that the pollster doesn't think less of them. And then finally, there's the Bradley effect. And with African American candidates, people don't want to be seen as bigoted, so they will lie and say they're voting for a person of color when they're really not. And this happened in a governor election. And there was an African American man with the last name Bradley, and this is where this effect came from. And he was leading the polls so far and above his opponent. But then on election day, he lost, and people were shocked. They had no idea how he lost. And finally, this is when they discovered the Bradley effect. Oops, sorry. There we go. 4.7, ideologies of political parties. The modern Republican Party holds a conservative party doctrine. Republicans for decades have preached against wasteful spending and for a strong national defense, limited regulations of business, and maintaining cultural traditions. Democrats, on the other hand, uphold a more liberal doctrine advocating for civil rights, women's rights, and rights of the accused. Democrats also desire more government services to solve public problems and greater regulations to protect the environment. These very general ideological positions of the two major parties tend to determine the terms of debate of public policy issues. Additional minor parties are players in the public political game and have a degree of influence in policymaking. So mainly our political system is a two-party system, the Republicans and the Democrats. And so these are very generalized ideas of what they believe, but ultimately kind of when you boil it all down, this is what you're left with. All right. So Americans have a range of values, attitudes, and beliefs. These influence the development, goals, and implementation of public policy over time. Policies in place at any given time represent the success of the parties whose ideologies they represent and the political attitudes and beliefs of citizens who choose to participate in politics. And so we've got majoritarian policymaking and interest group policymaking. And in majoritarian policymaking, which emerges from the interaction of people with government in order to put into place and carry out the will of the majority. And then popular ideas will work their way into the body politic via the state and national legislature. And basically what this is saying is people that have majority opinions are just going to get their policies taken care of because that's what most of the people want. And then another way of policymaking is interest group policymaking. And interest groups have a strong influence and interact with all three branches in the policymaking process. They fund candidates who support their agendas, experts sympathetic to their concerns provide testimony at hearings, and they push for specific areas of policy to satisfy their members and their philosophy. So we've got either the ideas coming from the majority and making their way into public policy, and then we have got interest groups pushing their agenda to get into public policy. So balancing liberty and order. No matter the approach to public policy making, two underlining principles guide the debate. One is the core belief in individual liberties. The other is the shared belief that one important role of government is to promote stability and social order. Policy debates are often an effort to find the right balance between the fundamental values of liberty and order. Governmental laws and policy balancing order and liberty are based on the Constitution and have been interpreted differently over time. So everybody can agree that we want liberty and order, but we can't always agree on how to get liberty and order. All right. So governing economic and budgetary issues is challenging, especially considering the general desires of the citizenry. Most people have three desires for government finances: lower taxes, no national debt, and enhanced governmental services. Having all three is impossible. So how do politicians satisfy these wants? It's very hard to do. This is the balance that politicians are constantly trying to win with. They want to keep a balance, but how do you balance all three? Varying views on the role of government involvement and regulation of the economy are based on different economic theories. Liberals subscribe to the theory of English economist John Maynard Keynes to support their views. Conservatives rely on supply side theories developed by economists during the presidency of Republican Ronald Reagan. All right, so for the Democratic Keynesian economics. Keynesian economics address fiscal policy, the part of economic policy that's concerned with government spending and taxation. Keynes believed that the government should create the right level of demand. When demand is too low, the government should put more money in the economy by reducing taxes and/or increasing government spending, even if doing so requires borrowing money, so going into more debt. If the demand is too high, the government should take money out of the economy by taxing more or spending less. So this gives us large amount of government control over the economy. All right, and then we've got the supply side theory, and this is the mainly Republican type theory. And so Harvard economist Arthur Laffer, a key advisor to Republican President Ronald Reagan, came to define supply side economics. And supply side theorists, or fiscal conservatives, believe that the government should leave as much of the money supply as possible with the people, letting the laws of economics, such as supply and demand, govern the marketplace. This approach is known as laissez-faire demand, or free market theory, meaning taxing less and leaving that money in citizens' pockets. According to the supply side theory, such a stance serves two purposes. First, people will have more money to spend and will spend it. And second, the spending will increase purchasing, jobs, and manufacturing. All right, let's talk about monetary policy. And so monetary policy is how the government manages to supply and demand, how it manages the supply and demand of its currency and thus the value of the dollar. So how much the dollar is worth depends on how many printed dollars are available and how much people in both the United States and around the world want those dollars. When there are too many dollars in circulation, inflation occurs. Inflation, rising prices, and the devaluation of the dollar is important, and it's important to know what inflation is. And so when prices go up of goods and the dollars go down, we have inflation. And there's a certain amount of inflation that's built in and expected about every year. It's about 2 to 3%. And a lot of companies automatically give their employees 2 to 3% raises. And so it's important to kind of keep that in mind when we talk about things like the minimum wage. And so right now, minimum wage is a huge thing in in the news. Everybody's talking about minimum wage and what minimum wage should be. And if we had followed the inflation rate, then minimum wage would be at $15 an hour. So $15 an hour isn't like a random number that someone came up with. That's what inflation says it should be. But we have frozen it for so long that we're really, really behind. And so that's kind of the problem that people are facing right now. Oops. So let's talk about ideology of social policy. And so social issues and ideology. This breaks down to mostly about social welfare. And social welfare is the support for disadvantaged people to meet their basic needs. Many people believe the goals of the Constitution are best served when the government plays a key role in providing for social welfare. Just as political ideologies vary on the issues of government involvement in the economy, so do they vary on the extent to which the government should address social issues. So people really differ on what they think social issues should be. Or sorry, what social issues they think the government should be involved in. So ideological differences on government and privacy. This is another big ideology of social policy. Other social issues besides government spending and labor also divide liberals and conservatives. These concerns matters related to personal choice and individual freedom. Liberals tend to think that the government should not believe the government needs to protect core values, even if doing so intrudes on some individual freedoms. So basically, liberals believe that we should give up, that we should have individual freedoms. Sorry, I totally lost my words. I apologize. And so when we come to personal choice and individual freedoms, we differ as Democrats and Republicans. And Democrats tend to support things like privacy, especially medical privacy, and things like Roe versus Wade. And we know that as a privacy issue in this classroom instead of a moral issue. And then we talk about things like, should we have wiretaps? Should we be able to do search warrants of Google searches? All things like that. All of these things are privacy issues. Oops. What is happening? I'm so sorry. Informational privacy? Okay. There we go. Okay. I'm sorry. My whole thing is like totally messing up. There we go. Okay. So sorry. Privacy and intimacy. Many of the issues that divide liberals and conservatives on privacy relate to the intimate decisions. With the ruling in 1965 of Griswold versus Connecticut, the court established the precedent for the right to privacy on intimate matters. That decision found that a Connecticut state law forbidding married persons from using contraception and forbidding people such as healthcare professionals from helping or advising someone else to use contraception was unconstitutional. The decision enshrined a right to privacy in the Bill of Rights that led to later decisions that prevented states from outlawing abortion and same-sex marriage. So, informational privacy. Liberals and conservatives often disagree on issues of informational privacy as well. Though both perspectives value the privacy of an individual's personal data, they sometimes disagree on where the balance between individual liberty and national security lies. Conservatives tend to be more supportive of government surveillance efforts, especially when the nation may be under threat. And liberals tend to be in favor of stricter limits on government surveillance. All right, and then ideology of social policy also affects education. On some education matters related to education and religion, conservatives want less government intrusion than liberals. For example, many parents choose to send their children to public school, which are often associated with a religious denomination. However, they must still pay local taxes that support the public schools. A number of states provide vouchers to these families to defray the cost of these public schools. Conservatives argue that the freedom to choose the educational environment and curriculum of their children is fundamental. They also argue that private schools create competition for public school, which provides an incentive for public schools to improve to keep their students. Liberals, on the other hand, worry that funds being diverted from public schools will weaken an already challenged system. All right, that is everything for Unit 4 in a very fast speed round. Please join us on all the social media platforms. We are at ThinkFiveable, and we would love to hang out with you. Also, let's keep this conversation going over in Discord. This is the Discord link. After each CRAM, we go hang out in the Fiveable forums and talk and answer questions. And we would love to support you. So please join Discord. Please join the AP US Gov page so we can chat. All right. It's been great hanging out with you tonight. I hope that y'all do really, really well studying. Make sure you get some rest. Make sure you take care of yourself. And I will see you for the 5 hour. Bye, guys.